Okay, greetings people. I thought I would follow up some of the discussion that I posted on the last video about the the nature of violence, and the book that I really want to recommend to people. This is by Krishnamurti, called The Awakening of Intelligence, and it has a lot of different discussions, dialogues with various people, including some with David Bohm that are really good. But the one that I want to recommend in particular here, this is later on in the text. It's called uh, Violence and the Me. Violence and the Me. And I think you can find a lot of these same ideas in David Bohm's book on dialogue. And maybe I see if I can't just talk about that just for a couple minutes here anyway. I think part of the issue is that when we look out in the world, and there's a lot of strife and there's conflict, but when we see it, I think we don't realize how much our own thought, the way that we categorize, the way that we cut things up into groupings is part of that conflict. I think we think there's an outward conflict, and then thought maybe registers it or acknowledges it, or I guess um, regards it. But it would seem to be more the case that the very the very conflict that we witness out there is the same conflict that occurs within us, and it has to do with the way that we think, the way that we've divided up the processes of the world into all kinds of categories and groupings of good guys and bad guys, of the left and the right, of Republican, of Democrat, of countless forms of ethnic and racial and national identities. See, these are a kind of violence. When some person takes a pride in a belief to such a degree that they want to denigrate another who has another belief, or the more attachment that we have to sets of beliefs, I guess the more we feel the need to retaliate against those others whose views are different than ours. And it's very subtle, but part of the real insights of the general semantics movement, which I think in a lot of ways is, it's like a science-based Western Buddhism. It's trying to learn how to become aware of your own conscious mind, your own appraisals of things, your own reactions, in particular, the symbolic abstracting process that you're using. And so let's try to just, and this is partly because I've been talking about this on my channel for the last couple of days, and so it's sort of fresh in my mind, but to try to think about the ways that during the Occupy Wall Street stuff, as this is going on, the words government and corporations and banks, I mean, we can use those words and feel like we know what we're talking about. We say, well, yes, a bank is where you go and you put your money and they lend money. And then a corporation, well, they make things, they produce things, and they have employees. And then there's this government. It doesn't have, um, uh, it has nonprofit status. It's supposed to be not simply a corporation. It's supposed to be serving the public interest in a nonpartisan way. I mean, we have all these kinds of senses of what one is, and yet when we really think about it, the more you think about it, they're a bunch of abstractions. They're noises that come out of your mouth, right? Government, corporations, right? They're not really things that we can point to. They're very, very abstract and nebulous ideas, and in some way, I mean, not only is each of those words a very abstract, nebulous term referring to countless particulars and relations in different people and situations and all this kind of stuff. But the way that those separate things are interrelated is is more than we realize. That is, part of what makes corporations what they are the banks, and The banks couldn't be what they are without the corporations. The government couldn't be what it is without the corporations and the lobbyists. None of those could be what they are without the other. And so the government makes the corporations make the government. But what all of that means is that when we're saying, just as an example, that the government is really a problem and we need to be anti-state, or we need to get rid of all, um, I guess, all federally funded or state operations. I think part of the problem is that it's easy to overlook all the ways in which the liberties that we now enjoy were funded and made possible by the state. So just take here, I mean, I'm shooting this video and we're posting it on YouTube. Arguably, the computer technology and all of these telecommunication technologies, these wouldn't have been possible without sort of an overflow of military and government application. I mean, so many of the everyday aspects of our lives that we just just take for granted. I mean, countless ways that we enjoy fruits from around the world, the way that we enjoy music from around the world, these were made possible by the kinds of mega conglomerate corporation governmental processes that conspired to make modernity. As much as I think we could talk about the kinds of meaning horizons that were maybe more robust for tribal oral peoples, I think part of the problem, and this is a wonderful line said by Lee Thayer to me one time, is that sometimes the only way to ever get back home is to have never left. And the technologies that we now have, they've removed us from some of those earlier conditions, but it's easy to underestimate how much we're standing on and enjoying what we're also going to, at a different level, sort of poke fun at and point to an admonishing a finger at. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there's so many complexities of interrelation that we engage in a kind of violence with thought. And the difference, okay, so what would be the difference between violent thought and nonviolent thought? Maybe that'd be a way to come at it. I don't think all thought is violent. I think thought which thinks that it's going to think it clear is potentially violent thought. Probably the most potentially violent thought. Thought which learns to suspend believing itself. There's this great line, right? Don't believe everything you think. The more that you can learn how to just not believe everything you think, and to the best of your capacity, not become emotionally attached to an idea at all. You just simply watch it and you witness it. The more that thought, and thought is not just one's thought, but the more that thought between oneself and others, the more that it can flow openly without people getting hostile or reacting or becoming alarmed by the thought, I guess the less violent the thought is. It's people witnessing thought, letting it unfold, and seeing if they can witness the many forms of incoherence and inconsistencies in the thought, the way that thought oversimplifies. See, I think if we are to have the kind of transformation of consciousness that I think many people would like to see, it would be a radical transformation in the way people think about themselves, about their relations to others. I don't know that it entails getting rid of all the infrastructure. I think what it entails is, again, a radical change in the way that people understand themselves, the way that they understand thought. There's so much divisiveness in the world right now. There's so much us and them, and yeah, the point of violence isn't of name calling and of the words that we say to others. It's the way that thought breaks up the world, and then we become attached to fragments, and then we try to make the world fit into the fragmented molds that we have. We have whole belief systems which are fragmentary and broken, and they're partial truths, and we keep trying to force the world into fitting into our ideas, and that just creates more conflict, more disruption. People disagree with one another. And why do they disagree? Because both people are trying to fit the world into the mold that somehow is part of their identity, right? That the belief systems that we have, when people disagree with us, I think we feel it like a personal attack, and we say, hey, don't pick on me and don't be so aggressive. And there is that feeling, partly because people get so ego attached to their beliefs, because their beliefs become part of a worldview. The claim is that there's a yearning for authoritative disambiguation, that people want a belief in how things really are, how they're supposed to be. And that belief oftentimes leads them into a scapegoating and a kind of action against the person who holds a different belief. And at any rate, that is one of the sources of violence, the actual physical retaliation. But the violence is much more subtle. I do think thought, to the extent that it's not simply watched and observed and witnessed, is very, very much, it's a kind of subtle violence that we've learned to tolerate. Um, and it then becomes the source of lots and lots of forms of physical, recognizable violence in the outward world. But if we think that we're going to get rid of all the physical violence, as if someone can fight against the violence, violence is one thing you're never going to be able to fight against, because that's already the fragmentariness of thought, thinking about the world in a certain way. Okay, those are some thoughts. Thanks.